Welcome to CITV. I'm your host, David Major. When I was on the National Security Council staff, my office was in the old executive office building behind me. And numerous times we had to come up here to F Street, to 1724 F Street, which was the home of the intelligence community staff. For almost 20 years, from the mid-1970s to the mid-1990s, in this building, the intelligence community leaders met. In fact, the National Foreign Intelligence Board met here every Thursday to talk about what they needed to do to gain the intelligence that was necessary for the decision-making process of the United States. In this segment of CITV, we're going to listen to Christopher Boyce testify on Capitol Hill. And he's going to talk about espionage as a solution to nothing. And that was true as it related to his life. But in this building, the intelligence community leaders had to try to overcome the damage he had done because he compromised some of the most significant technical collection systems the U.S. government had. Let's go listen to Christopher Boyce testify on Capitol Hill.
Within the TRW vault, management had effectively compartmentalized security away. By making the vault such a highly secret area, those of us inside had been given, in effect, total autonomy. We worked under our own set of rules, or more accurately, lack of rules. We brought in an uncleared company locksmith and altered the numbers on the vault tumblers by half clicks to prevent unauthorized access by our superiors. We did not want them trespassing on our private preserve. We regularly partied and boozed it up during the working hours within the vault. Bacardi 151 was usually stored behind the crypto machines. Under security regulations, we were required to destroy the code cards for the machines daily in a destruction blender. We chose instead to throw the code cards towards, but not necessarily in, canvas bags in the corner. We used the code destruction blender for making banana daiquiris and Mai Tais. Although only about 8 people had authorized clearances to the vault, often many non-cleared members of our club, so to speak, would be in the vault for libations. On occasion, the project security manager would join us for a drink on the house. Part of our informal duties included frequent runs to the liquor store with orders from various employees throughout the building. We used the satchel for classified material as a cover to bring in their peppermint schnapps, rum, Harvey Wallbanger mix, what have you, along with our stout malt back into M4. In doing so, I sometimes used the satchel to take classified documents out. To return the documents, I used packages, potted plants, and camera cases. Packages and briefcases were never searched by the guards. On one occasion, I needed to return a rather large ream of documents, about this big, that I had taken out earlier in the satchel on a Rhyolite beer run. I went to a floral shop and bought 2 large clay pots about 2 feet tall. I put the ream of documents in one after wrapping them in plastic, covered it with dirt, and then stuck bushy plants in both pots. I brought one of the plants into the building myself and asked the security guard to carry the plant holding the documents back into the building. He obliged. A more severe security breach regularly entered our vault over the encrypted teletype link from Langley. Routinely, we would receive from the CIA communications operators misdirected Twixes on other contractors' projects. We were not cleared for these projects, and there was no accountability for misdirected Twixes we received other than a lackadaisical request to destroy typed from the Langley communications operators. To briefly return to badges and identification, the camera and film used to photograph employees for their picture identification were stored in one of the black vault safes on a shelf directly beneath the NSA crypto codes. It always struck me as both odd but still typical at TRW that objects such as these would be stored together. I remember only 2 government inspections in the vault during the entire time I was there. It amazed me that even though we were using all this highly secret equipment that belonged to the government wasn't even around to oversee it. As for TRW's own security, Mr. Carr, the security director, could not take 2 steps towards the vault without our knowing about it in advance. The security guards always warned us in plenty of time concerning his movements. As a result, as far as I can tell, Mr. Carr was completely unaware of the security breaches in the vault. He gave his orders from inside a bureaucratic cloud. I distinctly remember one of two government inspections. The code cards for the crypto machines came in checkbook-style binders, sealed in clear plastic envelopes. The envelopes were to be unsealed and the binders removed only at the beginning of the month they were to be used. We were given books of these codes, sometimes 5 months in advance of their date use, despite obvious security risks. I was amazed that the NSA would let half a year's worth of their codes sit anywhere out of their possession. At the time of the inspection, I had been unsealing some of these future codes, removing them and photographing them. I would reseal the plastic with the heat from an iron or with glue and then replace them in the vault. They were all packaged in an established official manner. The inspector came across one code binder that I had replaced upside down and face down and then resealed. Once tampered with, the plastic envelopes never looked quite the same, despite my botched efforts at resealing them. He noticed it, looked puzzled, but instead complained about some other relatively insignificant missing item, one that no one could remember. He had looked closely at the displaced code card binder, but he chose to pass over the broken seal. Document control itself was poorly supervised. It was one of my tasks to take the Twixes and other messages to our reproduction center. From there, I would distribute copies to various authorized recipients in TRW. On numerous occasions, I would see different employees later reviewing these classified documents, even though they were not cleared for access to them. At times, employees would ask me for additional copies of these classified documents, given them since they couldn't find or had lost their assigned copies. My experiences at TRW have caused me to come to certain conclusions about personnel security. I know that a number of changes have been made in the way the government conducts background investigations that supposedly alert the investigators to potential security risks. I have been told that there is now greater emphasis on peers in background investigations. This was a basic reform if it is stuck. Friends of parents could simply not give a true insight into what made Christopher Boyce tick. As I said before, if this had been done, I believe I would never have gotten the job in the first place. Secondly, I should have been interviewed in great detail regarding my lifestyle and attitudes. I was never questioned about these points, which seemed to me to be important indicators for future security breaches. Had I been interviewed in this manner, I also believe that I would never have been assigned to that sensitive position. Thirdly, I know that if I had been polygraphed solely on attitudes towards the government and the CIA or even marijuana use, I probably never would have been considered for the job, but then neither would most of the friends I grew up with. There are also a number of changes in security procedures that would have detoured my brazen acts and also greatly increased my chances of getting caught. Although these suggestions might not stop the professional spy, they would certainly have affected amateurs like myself. First, supervision over special projects such as the one I was involved with must be strengthened, especially supervision over the security sections of the special projects. There was little, if any, outside influence over our day-to-day activities. We were project security, and we viewed security as a joke because we could easily circumvent it by our insulation from the usual management controls. What little security we saw was ineffective and incompetent. If we had been strictly supervised, perhaps I would have thought twice before acting as I did. Instead, I decided that the intelligence community was a great bumbling, bluffing deception. Second, a policy of inspecting every parcel, briefcase, and package going into and out of buildings such as M4 should be implemented. Although this in and of itself would not have prevented me from concealing material on my person, it would have increased my awareness of security as well as my chances of getting caught. Third, metal detectors should be installed in buildings such as M4 where there are highly secret projects. Such devices might have prevented me from bringing the camera that Dalton gave me repeatedly in and out of the project area. Fourth, If there had been encoding devices on the classified documents that could be monitored at building exits, I would never have attempted to take the actual documents out. I am aware of similar devices on library books and items of merchandise that sounds alarms if one attempts to remove them. Fifth, a policy of limited polygraph examinations at the time of termination of employment on questions of unauthorized disclosure should be implemented. This policy should be explained to the applicant for employment at the time of hiring. He should be reminded of this policy throughout employment. If I had known this, I would never have considered an act of espionage. Contrary to assurances by me, by the KGB officer in Mexico City that they had ways to beat the polygraph, I knew that I could not pass a polygraph and greatly feared it. The same fear heightened my resolve never to accept direct employment with the CIA, although on 2 separate occasions it was offered. This policy, distasteful as it is, should be considered one of the best deterrents to those toying with the thought of espionage. Sixth, for the same reason, I think that the limited use of the polygraph at the time of an employee's update investigation would heighten the fear of being caught sooner in a case such as mine. But fear alone cannot achieve security. Seventh, the number and scope of on-site investigations by the government should be increased. Both of the 2 inspections I recall at TRW appeared to be pro forma, just requiring us to show the inspector that we had certain items on their checklists. Never once were we questioned on knowledge or compliance with security procedures. Never once, as I recall, were questions asked concerning our very cluttered workspace. Never once were we questioned on destruction of old ciphers or other classified materials. Eighth, I recommend some system of anonymous complaints concerning security breaches that would be directed to the government and not to the company. If I had seen posters on some sort of hotline system operating within the company, it would have given me pause to consider what I was doing. It would not only have deterred espionage, but it would have deterred everything else. All of this brings me to another point I would like to raise. I am convinced from my own experiences that what I say now is by far the most useful contribution that I can make to this subcommittee's study of personnel security. While I think these security regulations you review are important to maintain the integrity of the government, I believe that they are next to worthless if each of the 4 million Americans with security clearances do not have a grasp of how espionage would affect them personally. No matter what security procedures are devised, if a man built it, another man can circumvent it, and usually in the most simple way. At best, physical security can only make things tougher. The increase of espionage that you are experiencing will not be a passing phase unless popular myths about espionage are debunked for the fraud they are. I think even in these responsible times that have not carefully monitored, the intelligence community of any Western nation can be potentially a threat to an open society. But there is nothing potential about the KGB. That state apparatus not only threatens every open society, but it crushes open societies. That is the distinction that I could not see at a rebellious 21. And it is a distinction that which Americans must see. The security organizations of both sides spy and engage in clandestine tactics. And in Mr. Gorbachev's new age of Camelot at the Kremlin, it will be easier for naive Americans to rationalize away the distinction between the restrained secrecy that defends them and the menace that seeks to deceive them. By your own estimates, there are at least 500 KGB agents in the United States. And senators, I respectfully suggest that the overwhelming majority of the 4 million Americans with security clearances are extremely naive in their conceptions of espionage. That is the root of your problem. When I was at TRW, I and several hundred other relatively fresh employees were given a group talk on the perils of espionage. A clean-cut, all-American type addressed us from the podium. Here I sat with the KGB monkey already on my back, surrounded by all these young people who were being fed totally inaccurate and inappropriate descriptions of espionage. They were given the impression that espionage was some exotic, glamorous escapade. Handsome Slav spies would seduce young American secretaries on their vacations in Brussels and bend them into secret agents for the KGB. That type of approach to preventing espionage was and is disastrous. That was just what all those bored young secretaries around me were dying to hear. It was surreal. A government spokesman, automatically accepted by everyone as competent, stood there entertaining all those naive, impressionable youngsters around me with tales of secret adventure, intrigue, huge payoffs, exotic weaponry, seduction, poison, hair-raising risks, deadly gadgetry. It was a whole potpourri of James Bond lunacy, when in fact almost everything he said was totally foreign to what was actually happening to me. Where was the despair? Where were the sweaty palms and shaky hands? This man, Ned, said nothing about having to wake up in the morning with a gut-gripping fear before steeling yourself once again for the ordeal going back into that vault. How could these very ordinary young people not think that here was a panacea that could lift them out of the monotony of their everyday lives, even if it was only in their own fantasies? None of them knew, as I did, that there was no excitement, there was no thrill. There was only depression and a hopeless enslavement to an inhuman, uncaring foreign bureaucracy. I hadn't made myself count for something. I had made my freedom count for nothing. As we sit here, a half dozen, perhaps a dozen, perhaps more Americans are operatives of the KGB. Perhaps some of them have been in place for years. I tell you that none of them are happy men or women. And I would suspect that there are hundreds of other Americans out of the 4 million with security clearances who have given serious thought to espionage. Those are the people that you must seek out and reach with the truth. It is infinitely better for you to make the extra effort to ensure that your personnel understand beyond a shadow of a doubt how espionage wounds a man than for more and more of them to find out for themselves. No American who has gone to the KGB has not come to regret it. For whatever reason a person begins his involvement, a week after the folly begins, the original intent and purpose becomes lost in the ignominy of the ongoing nightmare, be it to give your life meaning or to make a political statement, be it to seek adventure or to pay delinquent alimony, be it for whatever reason. See a lawyer or a psychiatrist or a priest or even a reporter, but don't see a KGB agent. That is the solution to nothing. I only wish, Senators, that before more Americans take that irreversible step, that they could know what I now know, that they are bringing down upon themselves heartache more heavy than a mountain.
Well, as we listen to Christopher Boyce, we really have a number of messages that come to us from this last testimony in front of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in 1985. Interesting, as you watch this testimony, he was testifying in front of the chairman at that time, Cohen, who became the Secretary of Defense under President Clinton. Also, you see in here Gore, who becomes the Vice President of the United States. So we have two very senior people in the executive branch who listened to this testimony live, and it is compelling testimony. Now, in the first part of it, of all the things he says about security, he said he really feared the polygraph. That if he had had to face a polygraph when he left employment, he may never have started down his trek to conduct espionage against the United States. That's a very powerful and important message as we listen to him talking about what would have stopped him. And we know that nobody likes to sit down and go through that polygraph exercise, but it does act as a great deterrent. We know that through the 20th century, many individuals have avoided having to put themselves in that position. Now, beyond that, however, he really says something very powerful. He said that when we listen to security awareness messages, they need to have a different ring to them. They need to understand that when individuals start to commit espionage, it will change their life forever. And it is not a sexy, it is not an exciting, it is not a fun event. In fact, that's what he says, that we should never paint it to be something that you want to do, because as he says, this is a solution to nothing. And having listened to the Christopher Boyce in the movie and then on 60 Minutes and then listening to him talk about what was wrong with security, it finally boils down to it made no difference about they made it too easy for him, but it is a solution to nothing. And that's one of the lessons we have to take from this case. Because almost everybody who's ever committed espionage, when it's all said and done, bottom line is that this did not solve their problem, but it became the worst decision they'd ever make in their life. Next week, we listen to Christopher Boyce being interviewed in front of this committee. And I think you'll find that interview very interesting. So please come back next week for our last segment on Christopher Boyce. I'm your host, David Major, for CITV.